Welcome to part 2 of the pet care case study in our data science interview series. In this video, we will cover how to solve common data issues and interpreting analysis results. We will use SQL concepts like joins, case when, coalesce, group by, and so on as we work through the problem. In part 1, we had used user interaction data collected from pet care website and calculated the average menu dwell time in each session. If you haven't seen part 1 of this series yet, be sure to check it out by clicking the link on the screen or in the description below, or by visiting our channel Data Munchkin. When we did the dwell time calculation exercise in our last video, we had noticed that there were some users who had a menu open event but not a corresponding menu close event, which means they opened the menu but did not close it. Or perhaps there was some bug in the website due to which the data wasn't collected. In part 1, we excluded those users from our average dwell time calculation. Today, let's talk about how to work around this data issue and include these users in our reporting. We will break our analysis into 2 steps. To understand the scale of the problem, we first calculate the percentage of all sessions that have the menu open event but not the menu close event. Then, as a next step, let's experiment by setting the dwell time to 60 seconds for the sessions where the menu close event was missing. And let's recalculate the new average dwell time. Alright, so let's see how we can do these calculations.
We're going to extend the solution we wrote to calculate dwell time in part 1. If you haven't seen the first part or are having difficulty following along, please go back and review the first video. In the first video, when we did the dwell time calculation, we had excluded all users who had the menu open event but didn't have the menu close event. And the way that we had done this is through an inner join when we created the staging table. So the first thing we're going to do is convert the inner join to a left join and just make sure that in our staging table, we now see all users. In the first part of the problem, we want to calculate the percentage of sessions that have the menu open event, but not the menu close event. So in our sample data, where only 1 out of 3 users has that scenario, we would expect to get the output as 33%. One way we can achieve this is the following way. We're going to go ahead and create a count of sessions where the close time is null, and then divide that by the total count of sessions that we have over here. Now, since we have 3 sessions, just as when we run this query, we should expect to see 33% in the output. Now, when we run this query, we actually see that the output is 0. But something you have to note over here is that the output type is also of the type integer. And what has happened is a problem that you'll encounter many times in different dialects of SQL, is SQL does not automatically convert variables from one type to another. In this case, both the count in the numerator as well as the count in the denominator is an integer. And the final output, where you divided one integer by another integer, SQL automatically created that as an integer. But since we're expecting 0.33 as the output, this is creating a problem. One way to quickly solve this problem is to just quickly multiply any one of these values by 1.0. And now this value will automatically become a float type value, and that should take care of this problem. Now, when we run this query again, you'll see that the output is as expected, which is 33%. So this is how we would understand how many users actually have the missing menu close event. In the second part of our problem today, we want to take the null dwell time that we see in the staging table and substitute it with a suitable value and then recalculate an average dwell time. Now, one common approach to this is using tribal knowledge. Let's say we went and spoke to an engineer and asked them what they thought an appropriate value to substitute here would be, and they told us 60 seconds, right? And what we want to do now is replace this null value with 60 seconds and recalculate the average. How would we go about doing that? Now I'm going to show you two ways in which we can possibly do this. We're going to leave the old dwell time calculation here and just rename it as dwell time old. And then we're going to go ahead and try a different approach here. So in the first way I can do this is through the use of a case when statement. So I check whenever the close time is null. In that case, I know I'm going to get a null dwell time if I use the old way to calculate it. So I simply substitute it with 60. Otherwise, I go ahead and I subtract the open time from the close time and get the dwell time as I would normally. A more compact way to write the same thing in SQL is to use the coalesce function. The coalesce function takes two arguments and it returns the first non-null value that it encounters. So in this case, the first argument that we give to the coalesce function is the b.event time minus the a.event time. And whenever this would become null, such as for the third case here, we would ask it to use the second value. And in this case, it's a constant, right? So whenever we get a null value from this dwell time calculation, we're just going to put a 60 over there. So if we go ahead and rerun our staging table with these changes, it's working as expected, right? So for the third user over here, both the dwell time as well as the alternate dwell time approach have now imputed 60 instead of the null value which we were getting in the older dwell time calculation. So now we can simply go ahead and run an average over the new dwell time column over here and get a new value for ourselves. And there we go. With these imputations, the new dwell time that we have is 153 seconds. Could there be other ways that we substitute the value over here instead of choosing 60 seconds? Perhaps. Let's discuss that in a second. But before we get there, I want to quickly show you one other thing. Let's say you want to calculate how many different sessions we have for every single value of dwell time. I can quickly do that in the staging table with the following code snippet. I just select the dwell time and then the count of sessions and then group by the dwell time. And if I go ahead and run this, I'll get the output that I would expect for our 3-row sample data set. We have two users where we got 200 as the dwell time, and then the one user where we have imputed 60 as the dwell time ourselves, and that's the total 3 users that we see over here. So far for this exercise, we've been playing with data for 3 users. For the sake of this discussion, let's assume that we had data for several hundred users and all of their sessions. Once we look at the output from the query that we ran last, let's say we see the following table over here. Now, what would you conclude from this table? Now, remember that we were imputing 60 in all the cases where we didn't have sessions. And looking at this data, it looks like the number of users or their sessions where 60 was the dwell time by far exceeds all of the other values that we see in the data set. Now, what this might actually hint at is that 60 may not have been the most appropriate choice. So what other options could we have? Well, in this case, if you exclude this observation with the row 60 and use all the other observations to actually calculate, what you'll see is that the average value is somewhere around 183 seconds, right? So in this case, if you would have actually started substituting 60 as the missing value, you would start artificially deflating this average dwell time. So perhaps a better strategy in this case might have been to use the average of all the sessions and users where we had both the menu open and the close event, and then take their average and use that instead of the value of 60 seconds. I mean, one of the things you should take away from that is that tribal knowledge may not always be correct.
We hope you enjoyed going through our pet care case study. Feel free to leave feedback and questions in the comments below or email us at datamunchkinmailbox@gmail.com. If you have any specific topics you would like us to talk about, then do mention that in the comment section. In future videos, we will add more case studies from SQL as well as from R and Python. So go ahead and click that subscribe button. See you next time.